I just want to go down the line. What are the greatest challenges you feel in this area? We'll start with you, Alice.
So, is that...
Yeah,
yep.
Into the microphone.
Great. So I think there are huge opportunities for engaging business in this area, but we have a little bit of a ways to go just in educating business on what those opportunities are. So we have done some surveys recently, and PwC's also done a global survey in relation to business and how they're viewing the Sustainable Development Goals. Amazingly, over 70% of the business respondents to that survey said that they are not only aware of the Sustainable Development Goals, but actually looking at how they're relevant to their business and how they're going to look to implement the SDGs through their business. So I think that we now need to really look to those businesses that are already engaged in some of these issues and help them to scale up impact. And I think that we can do that through partnerships. So I actually think that there are huge opportunities, but there's just a challenge in trying to activate some of the companies that are out there.
Okay. Rhod?
I think, although it's becoming less of a challenge with time, that fundamentally the challenge is still there to actually see the value. So businesses being able to see the value. There's generally some advocates and strategists within the business that can, and they're constantly fighting to define the value and then get the business to invest in it. But with more and more corporations and not-for-profit organisations that are adopting these practices, we're going to see that momentum keep building.
I work for an NGO who connects low-income communities into the value chains of large companies. And so for us, as we work in this space, it's finding the balance between ensuring that there's commercial realities, profit for the companies, but that's also measured with strong social impact for the communities that we're working with.
So I think it's challenging perceptions in terms of what the role of business is, and that it doesn't just have to be the pursuit of profit, it can be the pursuit of profit and and social impact. And then I think it's also challenging the box that people put business in. So I work at Deloitte, I am a corporate social entrepreneur, and what I try and convince both Deloitte, and it is difficult, and other businesses that business does have a role to play, and working with not-for-profits to also encourage partnerships with the corporate sector to achieve increased outcomes.
Ramana?
So I think for businesses, short-termism is still a very big challenge. So the markets and investors still have a very short-term focus on return. And I think that's still a reality. We're seeing some shifts, and we're seeing some investors that are far more future thinking. But if you're a board or an executive committee and your major shareholders are all pushing you to give them a short-term return, it can sometimes be very difficult to think about how you can apply innovation or value add to things like the SDGs. So I think we're seeing a shift and a change, but I still think actually that's one of the fundamental challenges of our markets and of the way we've structured boards and executive committees. I still don't think we reward them enough for long-term value creation.
And that actually is interesting you bring that up, because it was a point that Greg Whitwell made in the first session early in the morning, and he was saying that we need to look at different models of how businesses invest, and also Adam had made the point later in the day. How do you, with a big business like IAG and Deloitte, how do you actually shift that? Because it isn't just, particularly for Deloitte, it's not just in Australia, it's global, So how do you actually do that?
A good question. So you need some entrepreneurs like Tharani, or you need often senior people in the organisation that get it and understand it. So at IAG, we've got a board and an executive committee that have been, over the last couple of years, really focused on moving to being a purpose-led organisation. And part of that was acknowledging that we would, in this modern world, not be able to be successful unless we were more focused on stakeholders and delivering value for them as well as for ourselves. So what's worked for us has combining, if you like, a top-down, so having our executive and board having some really good long-term thinking, with a culture of an organisation which has been very community-focused, with people that really like to make a difference for customers and the people that we work with. So I think it's almost you need top down and bottom up for it to work, and we've been lucky enough to have that, but not all organisations do.
Tharani, how challenging is it for you though? I would imagine that you would be one in a sea of many people at Deloitte. Do you sometimes feel that, you know, it might be a tokenistic nod to what you do, or, I mean, you know, not to be too controversial, but, you know.
Good, I like controversy.
Yeah. How difficult is doing what you do in a large organisation like that?
So it is tough. So often I do feel like a round peg in a square hole. I feel out of place. But the key goes back to leadership. So Deloitte has kind of reinvented its whole purpose. Our corporate purpose globally is to make an impact that matters. So I kind of fit quite nicely into the purpose of impact that matters. But it really requires support from the top. So I'm fortunate that building a social impact and not-for-profit consulting practice is something that has been endorsed by the executive firm of Deloitte, as well as the senior leadership in the division that I work in. And I think without the top and middle management kind of backing what you do, it's very difficult. That being said, there are days that are like this, up and down. Some days where I think, you know, am I really wasting my time? Am I better placed to work in the sector? But I think, going back to Ranjit's point earlier, you can all make a difference wherever you choose to play in the equation, whether it's in government, the not-for-profit sector, or the corporate sector. For this point in my career, I've chosen to make that difference from the corporate sector, because I think if I could get Deloitte's brand, connections, IP directed to social causes and social change, that is much more powerful than me by myself somewhere else. So for the moment, it is something that I think requires resilience, but requires support from the top. And if you're not in an organisation that believes that it, you know, at least at that kind of top level, it is challenging.
And I guess, Rhod, I was going to ask you, I mean, something Ramana said was that IAG had to shift its focus because it realised that it wouldn't necessarily be so successful in the future if it didn't. So it's quite interesting to see a large organisation be that insightful into its own, I guess, lifespan or potential lifespan. To what extent does it have to get to that critical point where an organisation thinks, if we don't change, if we don't adapt, we'll die? Or is it that, or can they actually adapt, you know, before they get to that critical point?
It's not always adapt or die. It's not. It doesn't have to be that critical. But yes, in change management terms, you know, you're looking for a burning platform. You're looking for a reason to change. And, you know, the reason shared value, fundamentally, I think the reason it's emerged and it's attractive is it's about competitive strategy. It's about you finding the creation of social value within your markets, and that being a point of differentiation between you and your competitors. And coming back to the point that the other two panellists were just speaking about, which is board level and executive level. I mean, the Shared Value Project started off as a pretty folksy little gathering in an office, you know, but early on we realised that if we didn't get leadership roundtables talking about this, and at the same time, yes, get practitioners talking peer-to-peer about what change meant in their teams, we wouldn't get anywhere. And it did take time, but sure enough, you've got the AICD talking that language, you've got the BCA talking that language, you have forums, you have, you know, leading corporates in Australia who are using that to frame what they may have been doing anyway, but evolving that with this new framework. So,
David, what's your view on that?
I think you know, our experience working with corporates and seeing that change is really trying to get to the commercial opportunity that exists. And so for us, when we go and talk to a company, we go and speak to them and try to understand where's the pressure point in their business. Where's the pressure point and where's the crossover with low-income communities in the developing world? And if we can identify, again, that commercial reality with them, we're immediately speaking their language. And then when it comes to, in our case, working with food and agribusiness companies, the future for them is smallholder farmers in Asia. That's their future market that they need to engage to ensure the success of their business. And so it then becomes a process of connecting the dots for them, to helping them to see the commercial benefit for them. So by engaging smallholder farmers, that's a way for them to future-proof their business, to ensure that as those farmers increase the quality and quantity of what they grow, those farmers' incomes increase, but the company is now future-proofing the sustainability of the business.
And Alice, I guess I'm curious to know from you, how do Australian businesses stack up against our global counterparts in terms of this area?
I think that certainly the Global Compact in Australia still has some growing to do. We have a lot of Australia's big corporates certainly signed up to the initiative and making great strides to implement our framework. But we haven't quite reached the tipping point yet in Australia. So I think that there's a real opportunity there.
What would you like to see happen on that front? We haven't reached the tipping point, so what could push it along, nudge it along?
Well, we are certainly growing as an initiative in Australia. We're getting there. I think that what we work, I guess, in two angles when we talk about these issues. The first for us is encouraging companies to act responsibly, and that's about negative impact, making sure they're not having a negative impact, making sure that they're respecting human rights, making sure that they're being environmentally responsible, making sure that they're not involved in any corruption or bribery. And then as a second step, we help to explore what the opportunities are for positive impact. And that's where issues like shared value that everyone is talking about come in. But I do think that we need to, in these conversations, not lose sight of the fact that as a fundamental first step, companies need to act responsibly. So we're certainly keen to see companies certainly exploring the shared value discussion and the opportunities there, but not forget that they need to act responsibly first and not do harm. You can't create value, shared value over here if you're having a really negative impact over here. It doesn't offset that impact. So I think that they can work hand in hand, but I think there's still a ways to go in that conversation.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, working with a number of companies and having members within the Shared Value Project as well, what we're seeing is companies are very cautious about making bold statements on shared value. They go and do that first. They go, right, well, before we're going to go out there and tell the community that we are this kind of business with these sort of practices, we need to make sure that the risks, that we are actually acting responsibly and we don't have risks associated with that. So IAG making the decision, I would assume, I don't know, but I would assume that decision's a very hard one for a business to make. They're very careful about going out boldly and saying, we are a purpose-driven business. And I know there's been some fantastic things the board and executive did at IAG to get their heads around what that meant.
And I guess in terms of change as well, Ramana, because IAG was not known to be a progressive organisation like it is now, it's significantly shifted. Did it take a change at the top in terms of, people actually leaving and legacy issues going literally out the door with people, or was there something else that happened that, aside from the fact that, we need to ensure our legacy going forward?
So I think we've, as an organisation, got a heritage of doing innovative things in pockets, of helping people in time of need. And so it's not that there wasn't already good things happening in the organisation, but we'd become the largest general insurer in Australia and New Zealand and a growing presence in Asia. And with that scale, you're more visible and there's increased responsibility comes with size. Actually, as an industry leader, there is more, the light is shone on you and there's more expected of you. So I think that would be one component. But another one was actually the changing world. So, the increase of digital, social media, the way people are making decisions about where they work, what they buy. Executives and boards, if they're thinking about the future, they're seeing those things and they're recognising that if you're in a traditional industry or an industry which has been running a certain way for 100, 150 years, there's a lot going on that's going to stop that going from another 10 years, let alone another 150 years. So there is some externality pressures that make, I think, boards and excos appreciate the need to change. So our change has been, is we've just announced an IAG Labs, which has got a very strong digital focus, which is rethinking the way we connect with customers and the way we develop products and services, combined with the work we're doing around shared value. So it's actually a significant organisational and cultural change that we've been going through in the last 18 months, driven by many factors. I think there's probably never a single one that does it. It's probably a combination of many.
Change is always a vexed issue, really, isn't it? Because on one side it's an opportunity, on the other side it's like, oh my God, what's going to happen? It's the end of the world. So when you recognise that you need to change in a large organisation, then how do you help, David? I look at you. How do you help an organisation through this process, through this change management? How do you effectively say, okay, it's pretty much coaching them through with the strategy and making sure that the organisation is intact through this change?
Sure. Look, I think as an NGO, the first thing you need to do is actually be pro-business and business friendly. Traditionally, there's been this sort of adversarial relationship between business and the NGO community. So I think if you're an NGO and if you're here today in the room and interested in this space, the first thing is to recognise the potential power to harness business for social good. Again, our experience is what we've done and what we've found has worked really well is we actually take senior executives into the developing world and we go out into regional areas and we sit down with poor farming communities and we talk to them and we ask them, what is it that's keeping you in poverty? We sit and we listen and then we imagine together, we co-create together solutions to overcome those sorts of problems. What we find for companies is that in those situations, I think two things happen. They notice some of the blind sides in the way that they do business. So often when you're down at that type of a level, your companies may not be dealing at that level. They might be dealing through local traders. They might be dealing through local middlemen. And there's just elements of business that they're not aware of. And so they see efficiencies that can take place. The other thing that happens in those types of environments is that there's an element of empathy that develops. And senior executives, they are people. They do have a soul, they do have a conscience. And so when you're sitting in that environment, you see the light going on and they start to imagine through a commercial lens how they can do business, but in a way that's mutually beneficial.
And now I'd just like to encourage anyone who has a question, just please come down and find a mic because we will open it up to Q&A in a second. Tharani, I just want to ask you, now George mentioned in the previous panel, he mentioned in relation to his industry, the construction agency, there's essentially a lot of greenwashing going on. And I'm just curious from your point of view in the financial services sector, which is culturally very conservative and very driven about, profit, loss, share price, delivering to shareholders, those sorts of things, and clients and investors. Is there a tendency to greenwash, or has there been a cultural shift there? What's your view on that?
Well, I guess professional services don't focus all that much on financial services in terms of the banks.
Yeah. Well, Deloitte. I mean, I guess. Well, okay. I mean,
it probably isn't my area of expertise.
I'm putting you in the basket of those sort of companies as well. But I mean, you have been around for a long time. You do fall into those sort of conservative areas. So, I'm wondering, do you need to see, in terms of change, a significant cultural shift in that sector, or is it happening, but it's essentially a greenwashing?
I think you do need to see more of a change. I think because of discussions such as shared value and there's an increasing appetite for businesses to see what they can do from a for-profit as well as a for-purpose kind of thing. There's a couple of drivers for this. I think there's one, consumers. So there was a Forbes study done recently. 62% of consumers want to buy from businesses that pursue more than just the profit motive. And if you look at ads like the Sydney Uni ad, Leadership for Good, it's a wonderful kind of reflection of the increasing appetite from consumers. The other kind of real shift is millennials, and they are in a war for talent. They demand better opportunities to work for businesses that stand for more than just the profit motive. I know for one of the reasons that Deloitte is really invested in social impact is because we have a growing cohort of future leaders that really demand it. And then I think the third is about strategy and growth. There is a cap in terms of the growth we will get to in an Australian context. Emerging markets is that next horizon when you think of horizons of growth. But it requires empathy, it requires the right kind of approach in order to do business ethically in these new markets. So I think, to Ramana's point earlier, as a business, you can't ignore all these kind of factors. Yes, there's an element of doing it because it makes a business look good. But I think there's also a growing element of people genuinely want to have the opportunity to see what business can do in advancing change. And my view is intention is important, but outcome is more important. So if we get to the right outcome, which is, achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, having more people out of poverty, we need to do it with the right intent, but focus on the right outcomes as well.
Okay. Question from the floor?
Hi guys, my name is Vivek. I've got a question for David. It's fascinating, the idea of taking executives to the developing world to talk to people and see what life is like there. But that's quite a cost in time and an emotional cost as well for people to do that. So how do you persuade them to do that?
Yeah, look, what we do, and it's not something that happens quickly, but it's really getting alongside the company and try to walk the journey with them. And so in the case of a senior executive, again, if you can point to how this is going to be an opportunity for their business, we don't go in there to say, hi, we're a feel-good NGO and come see some poor people. We actually talk about what's the reality of your business, where you're at, where do you need to go, and what are the where are the potential shortfallings that you need to overcome. And so, again, you're speaking on commercial terms. In fact, one of our largest clients, PepsiCo, a comment that they made about us as an NGO, getting them across the line to think in this space, was the fact that you guys understand us. A lot of NGOs come and talk to us, but they don't actually understand that we're a business. And so speaking to them on those business terms. In terms of getting senior executives, they're pretty busy people. And so usually what it will begin with is a relatively short mission in country, and so that'll be usually only 2 to 3 days with the most senior executives that we can get access to. From there, it then starts working its way down through the company where you're looking at actual line managers or procurement managers. The way that we've done that is either for individual missions for companies, or what's also been effective is taking a large mission where you have government, business, NGOs, the academic community all going in together, almost like a trade delegation, to assess those types of opportunities.
Okay.
Thank you.
Question here?
Hi, my name is Sebastian. My question is related to what you just said, Tharani. I think it's really interesting that you talk about outcomes. I think the panels before you also talked about all the changes being taking place recently with corporates and also with organizations and governments. And my question is, at the moment, all the change that we've seen happening is very, very slow, which is one of the criticisms that some people have raised. Do you think that corporates have a way of being less reactive and more proactive in fighting the social problems that we've been facing recently?
How would they be more proactive?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it goes back to leadership. So take Unilever. It's a favourite example because it's very much set from the top. So Paul Faulmann, the global CEO and chairman, he very much is driving a social change agenda through that organisation. They have a sustainable development plan. He's come out and he said, we will no longer report on a quarterly basis. We will report on an annual basis because we want to focus on outcomes more than just the profit motive. It takes real leadership and real guts. And I would love to see more corporate leaders in Australia perhaps putting their neck out a little bit. And yes, we've got a long way to go, but it takes that kind of leadership. That's why I love the IAG story. They've set up an entire division called the Shared Value Division that sits in their strategy division. So it's a really proactive approach to tackling kind of these societal challenges. In traditional kind of businesses, or in other businesses that I've seen, it sits on the fringe of an organisation. It's the nice kind of things that sit in a CSR department. You can't really affect change unless it's part of the real DNA of an organisation, and in my view, in that kind of strategy construct. But what would you say, Ramana?
I think it was a very good answer. I don't know if I can add more to that. Now, one thing that just struck me as I was thinking about it was the way it's been happening probably a little bit is that big organisations end up with the scale to have resources to start thinking about this stuff. The problem is those big organisations have become very big and slow. And yet probably the organisations which aren't that big, that are more nimble and innovative, would be better to sometimes pilot or test or tackle some of these things, but they don't have enough resources to be able to do that, which is where I think partnership is going to be so critical. So we're starting to see some of those bigger organisations look at how they partner with not-for-profits and government, but sometimes other businesses that maybe are smaller, quicker and more nimble. And if you can maybe get that to start to work, maybe we'll see some more pace. For us as an organisation, we recognise that not just for shared value or the SDGs, but just broadly as a very big organisation, we take a while to do things. So we've got a complete focus on it at the moment. Have created IAG Labs, which is all about testing and learning new innovations and products where you can connect into that capacity and resource, which can help us drive some of our shared value activities quicker and faster. So I think you're seeing some of these bigger organisations start to think about being quicker and faster, but you're right, it's a challenge.
And
One last question for the... I beg your pardon, Alice.
I think that the Australian government's also recognising exactly what Ramana has just said. We've actually just signed a 2-year partnership with DFAT, but DFAT's actually established an innovation hub and an innovation fund, and they're actually, exactly to that point, they're looking to put money into projects and just test things, and this is very new for the government, to put money in without expectation of results and without demanding outcomes, but actually taking a few more risks to see if they can really drive some outcomes faster by looking at some of these smaller, more nimble opportunities as well.
Mm.
And I would say there are corporates being really proactive. So I think we need to get go to the Shared Value Project website, look at those members and look what they're doing. There's some really proactive work being done. And I think what we're hearing here as well, the structures are changing. So the other one's social enterprise, and corporates looking at social enterprise, investors looking at social enterprises as a vehicle to achieve the social impact goals that they want to achieve.
And question over here?
Yeah. I'm actually happy that at the end of the day, it's like recognize that small people are also making a difference, because I'm a fair trader and haven't heard that term all day. And it's actually basically exactly what the big business wants to do. But me as a fair trader, I'm already doing that. And it's a small movement throughout Australia, but we're making a big difference. So I'm actually surprised we're not represented here at all. So I just wanted to ask your opinion about that as a fair trader.
I'm glad you've got the mic, because then you're representing yourself, which is awesome.
Look, I mean, I won't so much comment about fair trade, but I do just want to affirm the role that SMEs play, and it's something that gets overlooked. A lot of the research that's coming in now at the moment is that we're finding is that there's 2 types of companies emerging. So you've got large companies who are undertaking these sorts of initiatives as a part of what they do, and then you're finding SMEs who this is actually central to their entire success. And what you find is that often the SMEs might have a smaller number of people that they engage, but there's far greater impact that they're creating, where sometimes with the larger company, they're hitting larger scale or numbers of people, but often it's hard to quantify the direct benefit that's being generated. So absolutely, SMEs are critical, and I think the point that Ramana made was spot on. You know, you've got to find how you can do that. We're working with an Australian citrus company, husband and wife out of Queensland, just good old Queensland folk who've got a social commitment. They've been able to set up an enterprise in Laos, working with Laotian farmers, increase their income by 4 times, and they've been able to get that up and off the ground within 12 months. When we work with some of our other large multinational companies, it's taken a long time, because it's got to clear through legal, it's got to go through all the financial checks and balances. So yeah, there's absolutely a role for SMEs to play, and we shouldn't undervalue that.
Mm. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Carol Vale. I'm a Dunghutti woman from New South Wales here, and a bit like Scott, I'm a small business owner. And so I guess my question is, I love what you've been saying. I love the title, first of all, using business to change the world. So I grew up on an Aboriginal mission in northern New South Wales here. My business is probably the first one in our family, if not our Aboriginal community. And so I love what you're talking about in regards to leadership and, you know, the role of SMEs in changing the world. And I guess my question is so I know that Leah Armstrong spoke earlier around supply nation. So there's this end of, you know, Indigenous businesses, then there's this end. And it's this end of businesses here that will really make an impact in tackling Indigenous disadvantage in Australia. So my question is, I guess, you know, how can corporate support this end here? And I know you're doing a great job at this end, but how do you do that at this end as well?
Maybe have a first go at that. So Phil Lockyer, a colleague of mine, was here earlier this morning, Indigenous Engagement Manager. So we do some partnerships around secondments, placements. There's a whole bunch of stuff we're doing around trying to develop skills and capacity of individuals. But we're also looking at how do we help organisations, Indigenous organisations, build capacity and capability. And so we've got a few partnerships that enable that. But I actually think if you're a corporation, the way you can do that best is by utilising what you do as an organisation, so utilising your skills. So in our example, we're an insurer. So we've just kicked off some research understanding the risk management capacity and capability of Indigenous people and communities. Add on top of that then insurance, and is insurance taken up? How well is it taken up? How are claims treated? To help us understand where the gaps are, and we're doing that for small to medium enterprise businesses as well as for individuals and communities. What will come out of that are some insights which can tell us, actually, is there a way that we can develop either products or services or risk awareness tools, capability, communications that can help Indigenous businesses and communities? So that's what I think businesses have to do. They have to use what they're good at, the things that they either sell, make, do, to help then make a contribution in the right areas in the community.
And can I make a last comment about Indigenous business, about changing paradigms? And so it's not just about corporations, it's about for-profit businesses.
Yeah, but I think so just really thoughts going through my head, because I remember early on when shared value was, we were trying to figure out a language. What is it? Definitions, that kind of thing. And we were looking at, well, could you have a fish and chip store? Could a fish and chip store create shared value? Could a normal, so we're talking about SMEs here, yeah? And of course it can. Like, it's a source of healthy food. It's a meeting place for community members. If you looked at your business from that different lens, I can create a social impact, and actually that's going to be a differentiator for my business, and I'll make more money. So those smaller business here, whether it's fair trade's a differentiator or whether you're doing fantastic things on the ground with an Indigenous community, corporates target a particular need. Is it insurance? Is it finance? Is it whatever? And many companies in Australia have programs up around financial literacy and these sorts of things. If they don't have one, then why not? This is the job for the social sector and potentially customer bases, SMEs, to go to them and say, hey, I reckon I've got a need you can solve, and you could turn it into a business proposition. So a lot more of the stuff we're talking about now at the Shared Value Project is around how we help not-for-profits and NGOs to understand the value they bring to the table. And it's not coming and saying, hey, corporate, will you fund my social initiative? It's going there and saying, I got this, you need it. Let's work on what change we can make together. And that's probably a lot about the stuff you're working on.
All right, thank you. We have run out of time. Any final comments before we wrap up? Alice?
From this end first. Look, I think the Sustainable Development Goals offer a really significant opportunity. I'm certainly hearing from the business sector that this is a framework that they can really engage with and get behind. So I think that this is actually a really great opportunity. It's a great point in time at which we're seeing government, NGOs and business all starting to talk the same language. And so I'm actually really hopeful that that business is going to really scale the impact that it's having and grow how it's working with other people for much greater impact over the next 5, 10, 15 years out to 2030.
Rhod?
Yeah, I think one of the questions I asked us at the video outside before was just, what do you think this summit does, and what does the future look like? And I just think 5 years ago, the idea of having a career, a job called whatever, shared, like my business, running it, being a social impact business that makes money from doing good, was really a nascent idea. But quickly over that time, there's an appetite for it. So people who are at graduate level or finished uni or are in their own jobs and they want to evolve their career, there's real opportunities that weren't there. And that means that the corporate sector and not-for-profits and governments have changed because there are opportunities. It's a great time. This is the exact right time to have this summit.
David?
Yeah, look, I think 2030 is looking really good. There's been incredible movements that happens in this space, and I think both of these guys have reinforced that. But, 8 years ago when we started, we'd host events like this with the private sector, and we were talking about the Millennium Development Goals then, the precursor to the Sustainable Development Goals, and people just looked at us with blank looks on your face. What are you talking about? What are these Millennium Development Goals? Fast forward to 2015, and now we see individual companies hosting events for them and their clients and their partners around looking at the Sustainable Development Goals and what does it mean for them. And so there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of movement happening here, and it's really refreshing to see that change come about. And I think, the end goal, and hopefully by 2030, is that this is mainstream and that it's normalised. And I genuinely think that we're on the way there. I think all of our organisations represent that shift that's taking place.
Tharani?
So I think we live in a world where there is complex social challenges that I believe government and the not-for-profit sector alone cannot address in isolation. I believe that business is a critical part of that solution. And my only ask is that whichever paradigm you sit in, business, government or NGO, we really try and increase the cross-sectoral collaboration and dialogue, because it's at the intersection of the three that I think real social change is possible. But it takes leaders from all sides to kind of work on a combined kind of dialogue to really create that change.
Ramana.
Probably just seconding what Tharani said, actually. So these are big, hairy, audacious goals, as they should be. And big, hairy, audacious goals are very hard to achieve. And you can, therefore, I think, only achieve them if we do look at partnerships in ways we've maybe never done before. And so that means, corporations and businesses at all levels thinking about how they can partner and play a role. But it does mean, government and not-for-profits being heavily involved in that as well. So maybe the finishing note, we won't get to these without partnering across all three sectors.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the panel.